Hello, Uganda. Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Hotseat on 933 KFM. I welcome you. Across this beautiful country, Uganda, we're having a technical hitch, and my technical people are trying to go through it and maybe be on top of the situation. But as we try to solve our technical hitch, let me be able to introduce my panel this evening. Thank you very much. Looks like we're back. Guess who's back? It's our studio. Let me introduce my guest this evening. We have Senior Presidential Advisor, Mr. Moses Byaruhanga. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening, sir.
Thanks, Patrick. My colleague in the studio, our listeners out there, and I must tell them, the Wednesday panel today is operating from a refurbished, I can call it new studio.
Yeah, but with some teething problems and maybe steps, because we've just suffered the technical hitch. From the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, Mr. Godbar Tumushabe. Thank you so much for joining us. Good evening, sir.
A great pleasure to be here. I have been absent, working on the farm, but now I'm back.
Yeah, globetrotting, we know that.
I'm really
the region on the wall.
Here. And good evening, our listeners, and good evening, colleagues.
There was a big statement that was made today in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, by the President of the Republic of Kenya, and the two statement was, "I concede." That was huge, considering President Ruto, who yesterday gave a speech and never even talked about the reasons why his countrymen were on the streets protesting. He was only talking about people who had infiltrated the protesters and the criminal gangs, and he was talking about how he was going to stop them and won't let that go. He was in a combative mood, never even mentioned about why Kenyans on the streets. And today, President Ruto made that very famous speech with a very short statement, "I concede." You are a policy analyst. You are a lawyer. You also understand the Kenyan dynamics more. I mean you, Mr. Godbar Tumushabe, because at one point you lived in Kenya. First of all,
and also is in the Great Lakes something.
Strategic, strategic something.
Moses is beginning to talk like his boss, Great Lakes something.
but seriously, yeah. I'm amazed by what the Kenyan people can do. The civic competence of the Kenyan people, the young people who are calling themselves the Generation Z, who have been able to maybe go on the street on the first day they were peaceful, though yesterday they went bonkers. How do you read this situation in Nairobi, in Kenya?
No, first of all, I actually would want to start by congratulating President Ruto for that speech and being able to listen to the Kenyan citizens. Because really, a president is a representative. You are the manifestation of the sovereignty of a nation, and therefore you represent an entire population. And so when the population rise up in the way that the Kenyan young people did, it would only be a very, very hard-hearted person who has an ego to say, "I don't care." So I think we need to congratulate President Ruto that because for me, normally leadership normally comes, the true leadership comes with a certain sense of humility, that you realize that certain things are so hard, and when you exercise humility, then you are able to step back and say, "Oh no, I think things needs to be done better." Secondly, of course, is to really congratulate the Kenyan young people who have been able to stand up to the kind of oppressive legislation, because there is legislation that can be oppressive. These are young people. Most of these countries in this region, globally, the young people are faced with a very, very hostile environment. They are graduating into jobless economies. The Kenyan young people are very, very enterprising people. They have been trying and struggling to survive and thrive. Many of them have been working quite innovatively to come up with the new ideas. They are playing most of their survival now has been building businesses on different digital platforms. And so as a country, when you try now to go and impose a tax regime that undermines those platforms, you are not only killing creativity, but you are also depriving these young people of their livelihood. And therefore, we really have to congratulate these young people in Kenya and those who have supported them. And finally, as you said, I lived in Kenya. That society is phenomenal. I saw the Kenyan society, call it civil society, the Kenya Commission of Jurists, the Kenya Law Society, the Kenya Council of Churches, the students at the University of Nairobi form a front line against Moi's dictatorship, because Moi was one other dictator with Kanu. This was a very, very vicious dictatorship using the General Service Unit to abduct and torture people and disappear people. I saw, and Moi had also killed political parties like they have done here. So once the opposition political parties were demobilized, these civic groups ganged up in a new front line against Moi's dictatorship until it was dismantled, until Kenya got a new constitution in 2010. And I think we must congratulate the Kenyan citizens in the sense that the Kenyan people, unlike Uganda, where we had a 1995 constitution delivered to us by the NRA revolutionaries, the Kenyans fought for their constitution, and since 2010 they have been proactively defending it every inch to make sure that nothing is taken away from it or from them. And I see this is their victory in having to get Ruto concede and remove and pledge that he's not going to sign this bill.
Mr. Moses, Senior Presidential Advisor Moses Byaruhanga, it's not very often to see a head of state in Africa, because of the pressure on the streets, to be able to concede the way President William Ruto has done. How do you read the situation in Kenya?
Well, first of all, it's good that I hope there are going to be calmness in Kenya, because Uganda and Kenya and entire East Africa are so much together, in the sense that if there is a chaos or disruption of activities in one country, it affects the other. What do I mean here? If you look at the trade between Uganda and Kenya in the 2023, I've said it here before, Uganda exported to Kenya goods worth $1.5 billion. And Uganda imported from Kenya goods worth $900 million. So the trade between Uganda and Kenya was a surplus.
Almost 500 million.
Over 900, about $600 million. Almost double. So when there is a disruption of economic life and other types of life in Kenya, Uganda should be concerned. And that was my major point of concern, that any continued disruption of activities in Kenya had an impact on Uganda. Yesterday I was talking to someone who was the import things from Kenya, was saying, are your things moving well? I said, okay, as of today, we are moving. I said, okay, there's no disruption on the roads. I was concerned. So basically, I'm happy that there's calmness. But to answer your question back is, how did it get to this? In the sense that the taxes which the government of Kenya, which were in the bill, tax on sanitary pads, tax on bread. You see, in fact, when I saw the tax on bread, it reminded me, some of us who studied European history, about the French Revolution. You remember the tax on bread brought down the government in France at the time, 1779. Is this 1789? It's 1789.
The monarch. We brought down the monarch.
They brought down the monarch. So, see, bread is You see, food is for everyone. You can't do without. If you put tax on matoke, tax on here in Uganda, tax on beans, tax on things like that, you'd have a very bad situation. So my point is, why would anybody put a tax on bread in the first place? A common eatery. And Kenya, look, is a country which is not self-sufficient in food, like Uganda is. So definitely the food is costly in Kenya than it is in Uganda. The cost of living in Kenya is much higher than it is in Uganda. But all that was being brought about by government trying to raise funds to fund its programs. But I think it was the wrong strategy to tax food items and those other essentials like sanitary pads and others. So the digital economy was being affected. So I think the one thing important is to ask the powers that be in that country to look into all this. I'm sure they will have to revise their budget accordingly because of the expected, some of the expected income is not going to come because of the withdrawal of the whole bill. And in the future, one needs to look into the society. If you don't study your society very well, wherever you are, you can come out with such consequences. Okay. You need to know their concerns, where if you put any tax on something, it may not cut across the board. Some sections are heavily impacted, especially if you put tax on food.
Okay, we have been joined by Professor Gerald Karyeija from Uganda Management Institute. Professor, thank you so much for joining us. Good evening, sir.
A pleasure.
You know, the biggest statement we had today that...
Can you remind him that he's in a new studio?
Oh, yeah. How do you feel?
It feels good.
Yeah.
It's very nice.
Yeah, but of course, I would also... I think I also need to inform our listeners that we are still seated on the old seats.
But you also.
Yeah. New studios on old seats.
A dancing new table.
You guys are not easy. Be nice also to Stephen Mbide.
The decor, the lighting is super.
Okay. So kudos to Stephen and company and Jemo.
But I heard that he was at the farm. There's no evidence on the table. There's evidence of Mega Milk, but there's no evidence of the farm.
Some coffee.
It's coming. It's coming. Tareko Farms.
Professor, I don't know whether you watched or maybe recorded or live when President Ruto was yesterday making a statement addressing his country, and today how his mood really changed, how he looked a bit subdued, and then that famous statement, "I concede," and that I will not sign into law the Finance Bill 2024. Your reading of the events.
My reading of the events. To begin with, it is a reflection of how sometimes insensitive policymakers can be. There's what we call democratic principles of taxation. When you are going to have a tax regime, as Moses says, you study your society and see to what extent does it
impact.
How does it? Whom does it affect? How does it affect?
Can they afford?
Of late, even in policy, there's what we call regulatory impact assessment. You do an impact assessment as you do option generation and option selection. So what has happened shows that there was either minimal or no regulatory impact assessment.
Are you on a keyboard?
Of this tax regime.
Well, sometimes you feel like a lecture room,
But also, I liked when the political leadership realizes that it made a strategic mistake. It's much as the people have the right to protest, and much as there is maje, you can't use both to resolve such an impasse. So I think it was the right way to do it, for the political side to sit back and then reflect further, because they have three options: to reduce their government expenditure, to increase taxes, or to borrow more. And I think of many other configurations, I'm not an economist, but at least those three basic ones. And I think they thought that maybe this would be very helpful, because we know that a big percentage also of their budget is paying back, and usually it has the first call. So maybe now they should also think more about either more indirect taxes, and which are not affecting the majority of their population, which is more deprived. Maybe those have more, be taxed more, whatever other configuration that is more sensitive and responsive to the structure of their population. But two, there was a lot of they saw it coming. There was a lot of debate both in Parliament and also on the streets, and I think the assumption that they would crush the protests hasn't worked. I hear there was also reluctance from the security forces to be as brutal as some political leaders had wished them to be. So even the conceding was because the other arms of government
were not
particularly excited about the proposition by the police principal there.
Maybe what members may not have heard is that earlier today, the court also issued an order
to release the prisoners.
No, prohibiting the deployment of
the army.
Yeah.
Okay, let me pick out something that is more probably of an interest to us. Beginning Thursday last week, you would see somebody carrying a placard on the streets of Nairobi and saying Kenya is not Uganda. And then in this protest, young people sending, messages, in a way also attacking or maybe saying Uganda is somehow involved in this. Before we know it, the Uganda House in Nairobi is on fire. There's a tendency somehow for our big brothers to pick on us, Godbar. Why is
no, but you also pick on them.
What is this about? What is it about the protest, the common protest on the street of Nairobi, to be pointing fingers at Uganda? I don't understand that.
There was a general here who said he could capture Nairobi just within a week. You think that's not picking on them? Yeah, but look, Uganda and Kenya, they are big brothers or big sisters. And Kenya almost does things that are direct, how do I put it? That are almost directly opposite of what Uganda does. In all cases, you'll find that Kenya, the economy runs differently from the way the Ugandan one runs. The levels of innovation in terms of if you look at the digitization of the economy, you'll see that they try to be different the way they do their things, but more so in terms of civic consciousness, civic competence. You realize that the Kenyans, there's a way they feel there are certain things that unite them, which are about Kenya. And I used to participate a lot in international trade negotiations, and you could see it even when we went to international meetings where Kenyans, when it came to international meetings, you'd see Kenyans speaking Kenya, Tanzanians speaking Tanzania, Ugandans would still be in our different groups. So there's something different. But more importantly, Kenya has tried to keep its institutions independent and functional. So whether it is civil society institutions, the Kenya Law Society, you can't compare it with the Uganda Law Society. They are completely different in terms of posture, in terms of what the things that they do, in terms of how they relate with government or how they don't relate. The Kenyan churches, the clergy leaders, they are not like the Ugandan ones who will normally go for a pilgrimage to State House and sit there almost like...
Actually, there was a bishop recently who said, you see, now the election is about to come, now I need a car.
No, but you saw them even during COVID, they would go there to State House, sitting there like little children before the president, and the president is there now preaching to them like Granda ya Torah. So then you come to the security agencies. The Kenya police tries to do policing. policing work. And they know the limits. They know that their job is to protect Kenyans. The military here has turned into a police force. So, in other words, the security forces in Uganda, their primary job is to protect the government against the citizens. The security forces in Kenya, especially the police, their job is to protect citizens against the government. Because governments are brutal. They can be brutal. You can have a brutal dictator who just who just oppresses people and tortures them and kidnaps them and arrests them the way they do. In Kenya, you do it at your peril. They have moved this concept of individual responsibility for violations of rights of Kenyans. You pay on your own, and I think that's the difference. So when these Kenyans look at us, the way we are oppressed here, the way we are oppressed in this country, I mean, you've seen what happens in the parliament, the pillage and the plunder that is reported everywhere in the parliament, the corruption that goes on. And remember that you just imagine that the president here can be you saw the speaker and this MP from Rakai saying, oh, this MP was stealing, but she was bringing money and eating with you.
Okay,
and
let me come to senior presidential advisor here. There was a tweet attributed to President Yoweri Museveni responding to the protests in Kenya, where he said these are LGBTQ and TikTokers. Really? I don't know whether it was, because that's what could have enraged people. Although I think maybe it was not the official handle, the Twitter handle of the president.
I didn't read it, but as far as I'm concerned, you see, we have had these arguments here. You can see, I see Godbar saying here, the Kenyan police does this, blah, 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 blah. But see, when people are burning buildings, are holding blocks and hitting at people and so forth, it seems to be a civil protest. Yeah, disobedience or something. It sees this. And then the security forces must act on them. You don't know where in the world would you expect people to be burning buildings and say, oh, for us we protect citizens, so they should do what they want. That's the message Godbar is trying to give, in my opinion.
Which one? Which message?
That it's okay for them, the police there. Of course, what is the police? No.
That is your message.
I listen. No. I listen to you. I'm interpreting.
No, you're interpreting wrongly.
Yeah. So, for me, it's yes, people should demonstrate their views, give their views in a peaceful manner. There's no doubt about it. That's okay. But as long as people start, what was being done was wrong. What was being done, of burning buildings, including the Uganda House and others, it's imaginable anywhere in the world. That thing. You remember the January 6th in America, and up now President Trump is paying for it. What happened? The insurrection. So this was nothing different. People coming to take over Parliament. In America, they're trying to take over the Congress, the Senate. And the police had to come in and say, no, this is a beyond normal peaceful demonstration of showing your views. So we must distinguish between civil views, people giving civil organizations or civil groups giving their concerns on the government, and the kind of the anarchy which was happening in Kenya. Yes, Godbar was saying he likes the way the Kenyans do the things, but I know for a fact the Kenyan economy has not been doing that well in the past 1 or 2 years, and I think one of the reasons why this happened was trying to raise enough money to pay for what they want to do, but maybe using a wrong way. Because if you follow events, I think was it Gerald who said they could either cut their expenditure or borrow, and so what. I think the borrowing has reached the limits in terms of how much they would borrow. About 3-4 months ago, the dollar rate in Uganda went up, if you followed, to about 3,800 up to 3,000, close to 4,000. Why? Because Kenya was selling a bond to try to rescue itself from the economic challenges they were having.
Okay, gentlemen, we're going to take a break and the hot seat will be right back.
KFM's Hot Seat. It's hot, it's live, provocative, and digs deep into the issues. It's KFM's Hot Seat.
933, 933, KFM.
The hottest debate on all relevant topics, live on KFM's Hot Seat tonight. KFM's Hot Seat covers all the relevant topics every weekday, 7 to 8 p.m.
Welcome back to 933 KFM, and this is the Hot Seat. My name is Patrick Kamara. My guest tonight are I have Senior Presidential Advisor, Mr. Moses Byaruhanga. I have Godbar Tumushabe from the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, and I have from Uganda Management Institute to have Professor Gerald Karyeija. Professor Karyeija, we have Uganda House in Nairobi has been gutted by fire. Apparently, that it was set up. It was started by the protesters. This is a building that has just been renovated. It was supposed to be commissioned, I'm told, this on Saturday. They had put a lot of money into it, and we have lost that building on there.
Friday, 28th.
It was supposed to be on Friday. Yes, on Friday to be commissioned. I mean, there's something wrong with this kind of, negativity that seems to be coming out of Nairobi. I don't understand.
Every protest has its own ramifications. And
why of all embassies, focus on Uganda embassy?
And of course, these are also the effects of Trumpism. I think Trump championed the idea that if you disagree with an arm of government or government, then you can attack it. And I would see this being played out. Now, the question of why Uganda being attacked or in such a way, I don't know whether it was a deliberate attack on Uganda as Uganda, but you say there were also placards against Uganda and so
on
forth.
Thursday there was.
But I think there is a perception in Tanzania, in Kenya, that Ruto is under the tutorship of the Ugandan political establishment. So those who do not agree with Ruto,
the Ugandan thing, they don't. I don't think he's not a good student. They don't concede.
He's not a good student.
May assume.
But the speech yesterday, you could see that it was written by two people.
They may assume that even this was for the same. So they use that advantage too. There are also those who would want to, who may be enemies of Uganda, and they're using that opportunity to do that. Others may also want you to drag Uganda into the Kenyan domestic question. So I hope the Minister of Foreign Affairs and our external security, if it is still very active, it should be able to pick intelligence and explain to us. Actually, we deserve. If it is not yet out, we deserve a statement from the Minister of Foreign Affairs to explain to us.
He issued.
I think they issued.
They issued one.
They issued, and I've not seen it.
Yeah.
I don't know what it says.
They want the Kenyan authorities to investigate what could have happened. They still think maybe.
We also need the Kenyan authorities to tell us what has happened, whether it was accidental or whether it was deliberate. But also, one may not dismiss the initial statements by Ruto that the protests were also infiltrated by other criminals. So, I mean, politics is the art of the possible. Anything can happen. But that Uganda was... some coincidences create suspicion. We've just been having a milk discussion or battle or whatever it is.
And there was a Uganda police truck that had gone for repairs.
A fire truck which had
at the wrong time in the wrong place.
It found itself in protests. So those coincidences, whether they are coincidences or not, they create curiosity.
And then the tweet that was attributed to President Yoweri Museveni.
And then there is need for explanation. But I do not think that the Kenyan population has an aggregated hatred for Uganda. We have a lot of family. I have family in Kenya. I have friends in Kenya. We have professional associations and relationships there. Ugandan students are studying in Kenya. Kenyan students are studying here. When you're in Busia, students cross the border and come and study UPE. So I think it is just an opportunity to express particular views. I wouldn't want to hold the Kenyan population as an aggressive entity on Uganda as a country. But I think that the displeasure is, in my view, remotely traced to the association of Ruto with
Because
Uganda business and
during
Uganda politics.
during his inauguration, the way how he introduced President Yoweri Museveni, some people were not happy because he introduced him as the father of the region, and some people were not happy to hear something like that. But now that President Ruto has conceded, doesn't that make him more or less like a lame duck kind of president? Because
Actually, for me, it's a badge of honor.
Absolutely.
yeah, but there's some people who have been calling Ruto must go. They may put things a notch higher.
No.
Because they know he's malleable.
But they also know that the state exists.
No, I guess it's really, as I said, Ruto's concession on this bill is circumstantial in the sense of in terms of the situation that was obtaining in Nairobi. As a leader, I don't think you want that situation to be obtaining. You don't want. I think it would have been very, very unadvisable to get, because you are commander in chief, you just get your military and unleash it on the population. That I don't think that's leadership. I think what Ruto has done is leadership, and that leadership can be further strengthened by him calling these young people, if they have a leadership, but also the Kenyan civil society, because they are political actors. They are leaders, like leaders within the Kenya Law Society. Kenya Law Society has been consistently a very strong institution of state. So what Ruto does beyond this is to be able to get these people and say, let's sit together. I like the idea that he has already basically said, we are going to cut down on government expenditure. Because that's really what you're doing. What most of these governments are refusing to do is that they are refusing to cut down on their obscene spending and pushing everything on the taxpayer. Ruto is saying, no, we are going to cut expenditure on the presidency. We'll cut expenditure on public administration, and try to live within our means. Because many of these countries, they can actually be able to adjust and make sure that this burden, this tax burden, this debt burden that they are piling on us and on the future generation can actually be restrained. And I think, for me, Ruto has showed leadership. He only needs to take that a notch higher and get Kenyans to talking. Because Kenya has been exceptional in terms of the leaders coming together and beginning and talking the future.
Moses, as a senior political advisor, what do you read from Kenya's Generation Z or the generation of young Africans with the technology in their hands who can actually force a government to see things differently? You must be taking lessons, aren't you?
Well, all governments, one of their, what makes them stay or lose power is about employment. That shows you need to create more jobs. And President Museveni has been very clear on that here in Uganda. We need to create jobs. Yes, yesterday, his messages has been for anybody who plays around with something to do with question of jobs. That's an enemy for Uganda, an enemy for East Africa, an enemy for Africa, or for African humanity. So what I was seeing on the streets of Nairobi are people who want to earn a living, or who are earning a living in areas they could do better, but they are forced to earn a living in take for instance here in Uganda, you find a graduate riding a boda, and you say this whole person is a graduate, he's riding a boda. That shows you there is more to do to create jobs. Yes, you can say he's employed, he's earning some income, but not what he meant for. That he didn't study to go. Yeah, he didn't study to go ride a boda. So we need to create jobs. We need to trade more with each other as East Africa. We need to trade with much more with each other as Africa. And this has been the message of the president about patriotism, about Pan-Africanism. And as I told you earlier, Uganda in 2023 exported to Kenya goods worth $1.3 billion. Kenya exported to Uganda goods worth about $900 million. There was a trade surplus in favor of Uganda. This is good. And for me, I was concerned that if the situation in Kenya continues like that, it means you can't trade with Kenya
when it is in chaos.
Because it's in chaos, meaning that the factories which are exporting their goods to Kenya from Uganda will stop. That will affect our employment in Uganda. It will affect our revenues we are getting from the taxes and so on and so forth. So I was concerned. I was looking for a way, how can it be calmed down? And I'm happy that it has been calmed down. We need to work together more closely between Uganda and Kenya and Tanzania and the entire East African region. There are some countries like DRC which joined the EAC, but they are still having issues to do with they are not implementing the customs union, the customs protocol. In the State of the Nation address, President Museveni was very clear and he said, please, East Africa, let us remove non-trade barriers. For instance, if Uganda put trade barriers on goods coming from Kenya, it affects jobs in Kenya, and vice versa. So, although our trade was between Kenya and Uganda was in favor of Uganda, it could have been much better had there been no those trade barriers. So we need to work as a region, and I'm sure we work together on most of these issues. We shall succeed as a humanity, as a people of East Africa, as Ugandans, Kenyans, Tanzanians, South Sudanese, Somalis, Congolese, Rwandese, and Burundians.
Gentlemen, we're going to take a break and the hot seat will be right back.
KFM's Hot Seat. It's hot, it's live, provocative, and digs deep into the KFM's Hot Seat. Hot Seat. Hear the real story behind the story. Coming right at you. Only on 933 KFM.
Welcome back to 933 KFM, and this is the Hot Seat. My name is Patrick Kamara. My guest this evening, I have Professor Gerald Karyeija, Mr. Godbar Tumushabe, and Mr. Moses Byaruhanga. Gentlemen, you know, let me begin with you, Godbar, in this segment. Can we say now that the Ugandan young people, our own Generation Z, has learned some lessons in Kenya, and maybe it can increase on the civic competence of Ugandans? And this time around, if there's anything, and there are always things to protest about, they'll be more emboldened to take on the government, and perhaps also the government has taken lessons. They will listen this time around, because normally when we have protests, there seems to be more blood on the streets of Kampala than concessions.
I think this is the wrong question, Patrick.
Why is it wrong?
Sorry. Because you see, you're talking about two different countries. As the social media warriors keep on joking, Kenya is not Uganda. Yeah? So Kenya is a democracy. It's a growing democracy. And the growth has been consistent. Kenyan institutions are independent. They work for Kenyans. And you can look at all of them, whether they are executive institutions, they are the judiciary, the civic institutions, they work for Kenyans. I think there is a certain level of respect that the Kenyan institutions have for their citizens. So in other words, I don't think right from the time I lived in Kenya, you could see, first of all, you hardly see the Kenya Defense Forces personnel on the streets. So you really, and now you know, when you engage with some of the officials, because I have had run a program where I interacted a lot with the retired Chief of Defense Forces of Kenya, and they tell you ours is a professional force. Our job is very clear: protect the sovereignty of Kenya, protect the borders of Kenya.
So if you met General David Mwozi, he will tell you the same. Yeah.
So no, but I'm talking about the practice. I'm talking about the practice. Remember that in Kenya, you actually only serve as CDF for 4 years, and that term is non-renewable. So that's the military. So I think sometimes I make a joke and say there's a difference between a military and a maje. So Uganda, we have a maje. When you look at the conduct of the Ugandan security forces, their primary responsibility is focused on protecting the president, protecting the regime against the citizens.
But you should know that the military institution in Uganda is one of the most revered institutions, even on the continent.
No, you see, in terms of the professionalism, I think I've said this time and again that, you can afford Tumushabe for so many things because he has done wonderful things, he has also done bad things. But I think as far as the military is concerned, I think one of the biggest credits you give him is that he has allowed this institution to recruit and retain very highly trained professionals. Now, of course, many of us used to think that after all these institutions have collapsed, because most of institutions of state have collapsed in this country, we always thought that UPDF remains the fallback position in case of anything happening, until itself it failed when its General Kainerugaba started wantonly violating the constitution openly, and they could not do anything. Neither the army leadership could do anything, nor the president, who is the commander-in-chief, could do anything. So then you realize and say, even the UPDF, in this brokenness, actually, it also has.
They actually did something. They brought him in to manage it.
You get the point. So the point, my final point is that as far as I'm concerned, Kenya is not Uganda. Kenya is a growing democracy. It has institutions. The institutions are accountable. They are responsible. In our case, the institutions of state are really in a very serious state of flux.
The difference also, Moses, is that the Kenyan young people seem to be very active. They seem to be very active on social media than even other countries anywhere. They are ranked highly in the world, by the way. The TikTokers are ranked highly. There's that element that other countries in Africa do not have, of engaging in serious debate, in talking substance. Do you think the other young people in Africa are listening, are watching and learning?
First of all, let me correct Godbar here about General Kainerugaba. See, General was before he was appointed CDF. He was a senior presidential advisor on special duties, and he had authority from his that is a political civil service office to do certain activities which the ordinary army would not do.
Like I would attack Kenya in 24 hours?
No. The meetings he was having with young people, he was doing them under the office as a senior presidential advisor, not being deployed by the CDF to do those activities.
Yes. The campaign paraphernalia. Our next president, 2020.
So that's done. So as a senior presidential advisor, I address many rallies. I'm not a politician, but because of my office, I do so.
But they are not presenting you as a presidential candidate.
Well, he didn't present himself. Other people had their own intentions, but he was addressing those rallies. Okay. Now, to answer your question, you need also the other question. You need to look at the structure of the society in Kenya, as I said earlier. Kenya is more urbanized than Uganda. I don't know the percentages, but I think Uganda, the percentage of urbanization is about 20-25%.
About 27.
Kenya is much higher. I don't know the percentage, but it's much higher than Uganda. And then the question I raised earlier, the issue of unemployment, which is affecting Africa. Now, when these people are in urban areas, they're paying rent, they are buying food, for everything they have to spend money. And if they don't have that money, then it is for them to organize into what you saw in Kenya is much easier. So for most of us, so that's why I say the biggest challenge to any African leader today is to create jobs. And how do you create jobs for your young population? We are Pan-Africanism is important. Because with Pan-Africanism, as I said, when we are selling to Kenya, we are selling to Sudan, we are selling goods to Congo, and vice versa. We are creating jobs for the African. When we buy goods from China from wherever the world, we are creating jobs for the Chinese. Like now, our trade with China is our importation from, if you look at our import bill of about 11 billion, a big chunk of it is going to China and India. So, meaning that Uganda is sustaining jobs in China and India instead of sustaining jobs for our young population here.
Okay.
So the same thing is happening in Kenya.
Okay, gentlemen, in the interest of time, let me give each one of you a moment to give your concluding remark. I'm beginning with you, Professor Gerald Karyeija.
I think that I like it when the political class and elite, especially the policy principal, concedes that a wrong policy or regulatory decision was taken to minimize using the license of the state to brutalize and further cause damage to the population when it is protesting. But a lesson is being given unto us that the increased young population, the increased disproportionality in income and wealth and opportunity is a powder keg even here.
All right, Mr. Godbar, Tumushabe, your parting shot.
No, of course, just to condole with the families that really lost those young people that were shot when the police deployed the live ammunition to, in those protests, but also to really congratulate the young people in Kenya that freedom is fought for. Freedom is never given on a silver platter. The Kenyan young people have rejected handouts, the kinds of handouts that are normally used here. So the point you are making about young people here is that many of them running around, you see them running around something called Office of National Chairman, running all over the place distributing things. These are just handouts. And I think that that's one thing that the Kenyan system does not allow a president that leverage to abuse the consolidated fund by just distributing money all over the place and buying off people. So I think these are young people that need to be applauded and encouraged to remain stronger and be able to resist any public policies that they think are depriving them of their present and the future.
Mr. Moses Byaruhanga, your parting shot.
My parting shot will still remain that as Africa, we should strive to solve things which bring us together, like trade, ensure we trade more with each other. In 2015, Africa imported food items from outside Africa worth $63 billion. And we are here with all this great arable land. But why are we importing food from Ukraine, which produces about, before the war, about a third of the world's cereals? It's slightly smaller than South Sudan by about 40,000 square kilometers. It's slightly smaller than Somalia by about 30,000 square kilometers. But Africa is buying food from Ukraine. Very, very too bad.
Gentlemen, Moses, Godbar, and Gerald, I want to thank you so much for the time you have given us and for the submission you have given us. And for you, the listener, I want to thank you for the privilege of your company from a very shining and brand new studio, your KFM. This brings us to the end of tonight's